do I tell?
Today is September 23rd,
Yeah.
2021. And we are here in Seal Beach, California. Fat Karen at her home. It's 2:20 p.m. I'm Darwin Weech, and Julie Weech is here with us too.
Hi.
So I have really been looking forward to this, to just be able to ask you some questions and hear some of your stories. Tell me first about when you were born. What you know about it.
Kind of the dark ages now, but I was born May 22nd, 1939 in the little white painted house in Glenbar, Arizona. There was a doctor in attendance for my birth, but I was in the little front bedroom. And
So this is not the house you grew up in?
yes, it is.
Oh, it is, okay.
The same house that I grew up in. And only had 2 bedrooms and 1 bath. And at any given time when I lived in it, there were usually 4 kids, at least 3 of us. So, and I'm sure my mother was really pleased that Dad built her a house that was painted white, because some of the houses she grew up in weren't painted. And they liked to sit out on the front porch, and I think Weech and Taylor's the one that poured the cement for the porch, and it had 2 pillars so you could sit on top of them. And I don't know if Weech and Taylor poured the original, but probably not. But Davy Weech put the red cement sidewalks in, and the porch was red, and the pillars were white with red tops on them. They were just right for sitting on. So.
Did you say there was a doctor there or not?
Yes, there was a doctor in attendance.
You remember who it was?
No, I've asked Nada too, and I should know, but I don't remember. But John didn't have a doctor in attendance. He was delivered by my mother's Aunt Addie Blair. And
Later, Bryce.
what?
Later, did she marry Bryce?
Aunt Addie Bryce, yes.
Yeah.
I believe that's right. So, anyway, I was a chunky baby, and
Born healthy. Oh, that's good.
So you were the
3rd girl.
3rd girl.
Cheryl, Data, me, and then John. So.
So, what do you remember about your early? What are some of your earliest memories
Well,
growing up?
I have a few. I wasn't very old, and I got in the car with my mother in a Model T or Model A, not sure which, and my dad and grandfather, Grandpa Tom and other cowboys were down at what we called the Elridge place, and they were branding cows and dehorning them, and my mother had cooked this big pot of beans and made some homemade rolls, and we were taking it down to the cowboys for them to have a lunch break. And I remember looking in the mirror of that car, the rear view mirror, and thinking, I'm kind of an ugly little kid. You know? But that was one of my first memories, and the other...
The Eldridge place, was that north or west?
It was south.
South.
about where the Glenbar store was, there was a dirt road that went down the west side of that,
Okay.
and we went south, and there was a lot of corrals, and they had a chute that they called it, that they herded the cattle into to one by one to dehorn them. That wasn't pleasant. And I said, "Daddy, you're hurting the cows." "Oh, it doesn't hurt them." But he didn't really convince me at all. So I never was really involved with that kind of action anymore. That I remember, the next thing I remember is, as my first Christmas I remember is, my dad loved Christmas. My mother, I think, just found it a lot of work, but I got a little blue tricycle, and I wasn't quite big enough to ride it, so it sat out in the tractor shed, we called it, till spring or summer came, and then I discovered it out there one day, and I rode it up and down that lane so many times that I was riding it down there when I saw a Greyhound bus stop at the end of the lane, you know, on Highway 70, and who got off from it but Bertel, my brother-in-law. And Cheryl had been living at home because she was expecting a child and waiting for him to get the process of being out of the service. And I can still see him. He's a slim Bertel, and he went, "Shh," because he wanted to surprise her. And he was kind of walking. There was a red cotton trailer. My dad always kept his cotton trailers freshly painted and his name on the side.
W.A. Batty.
Yeah,
I remember
exactly.
those.
And anyway, that's when he arrived home from the war. And
That was Christmas 1945 that you remember. Or that's just one of the one you remember.
No, I don't think that. I don't know what. It must have been December, because he came home and went to work and built that little house behind your nice house that was set back there, and had it built in about 30 days, and they moved in. It was unfinished inside a lot, and anyway, it was good to have him home and know that he was safe. And
Tell me again the year you were born.
39,
1939.
1939.
So you would have been 6, almost 7. Well, 6
I
and a
think
half.
I think I was only 5, wasn't I? In January, I probably turned. In May, I may have turned. But I don't think I was 5.
And Rodell was born just within a few weeks of him coming home. Was Rodell born?
Yes, he was born on January 30th, if I remember right. 31st.
1946.
Yes. Uh-huh.
When he was born.
And I remember staying at their house, or being at their house sometimes, and attending. I liked being where the new baby was. I thought that was cool. And your dad and mother worked so hard trying to get Weech and Taylor up and going. He came home and started that business. They didn't even have a truck or a car. They went to work on a bus with their wooden toolboxes. And they came home on the bus. At that time, they had a regular scheduled bus that went between Pima and Safford all the time. So anyway, I remember being proud of them, and they took me to the mountains a lot with them when they went, especially after my mother died, especially when I was 8. And I guess I turned 9 that summer, but they were really good to invite me to go with them, and that was really helpful to me to get out of the heat. And I helped them some with Rodell too, and Davita Weech and I played together. She was 2 years younger than me, but we had a lot of fun on that mountain. And I loved being there and the coolness, and it was.
So you were growing up in Glenbar?
I was in.
Did you have little friends at all around?
No.
Play with? No one close by?
No. I lived a very isolated life, and I think that I have some problems being around a lot of noise and people, and I'm not the most social person in the world. And I think a lot of it is because I grew up pretty much alone. When John was born, and after he got big enough, Dad would take him with him a lot. And so it left me home with Mother, and she was always busy, so I entertained myself. And we did have a big tractor shed, equipment shed that Dad had built. He took care of his equipment, the tractors in his truck, and I think that was built before the garage for the car, actually. And when John would go with Dad, Mother finally had a day that she said, he's just worn out, and you need to leave him home today and let him have some rest. And he was asleep, and he heard my dad's truck start up, and he grabbed his little coveralls and all he had on was a pair of little jockey shorts, and he went running down that lane, crying, "Dad, wait, Dad, wait." And I could still see him there too. And there was a big bush that was about halfway down the lane. When I rode my tricycle, I always pretended that was the gas station, and I'd stop and gas it up. So I had a quiet but nice childhood. I don't have any regrets. I certainly didn't get the opportunities that many people got. I wasn't exposed to, I didn't take dance lessons, or at least when I was little. I did have some in high school, but that house was not insulated, so it was cold in the winter and hot in the summer, really hot in the summer. And the only cooling we had was outdoor, set in the window, swamp type cooler, but we didn't have water pipe to it, so Mother'd have to go out every half hour or hour and wet all the pads down so it'd be cool instead of just blowing in warm air. But that was a lifesaver for her. She didn't do well with the heat either, just like I don't. And Dad was really always good to make sure Mother had some money when the crops were in that she could spend on fixing up the house. She and Aunt Martha repapered and papered and papered and repapered the house. I don't know if it was every year, but see, Aunt Martha always came and helped her, and they had a lot of fun together. They'd can fruit and wallpaper walls. They made their own paste. Aunt Martha was really good at figuring out how to cut it and the wallpaper and just how to do it, and they enjoyed each other a lot. I had a big cat that I called Nice Kitty. I had found him down by the Glenbar store when I was really little, and he got enormous. He weighed 18 pounds, I think, when he finally got his growth, and he would let us vacuum him, and he'd put his arms out and legs out, and we'd vacuum all that hair during the summertime, which not many cats will let you come at them with a vacuum. But John had trouble with that Martha, because when she would come, the first thing she'd do is grab that cat and throw him outside. And he would sometimes he'd cry and kick and hit at her, and he had temper tantrums quite regularly. And Mother had a canary all the time that hung in the colonnades, is what they called them. To divide the room, they had a colonnade on each side, and a pole that went all the way to the ceiling. She called him Dickie. She always had one, and I remember Dickie and Petey. And Nada was the one that usually cleaned the cages, because that was a mess. But Mother also had a bird aviary out in back at the wash house. Dad built that for her.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was screened in, and she sold birds. People would come and buy parakeets, and I think parakeets was what she had. Anyway, our summers were after. Did you want me to go on about?
Yeah.
Our summers as I grew up were quiet, and we didn't have a neighborhood. When my niece, John's daughter Melissa, came to visit once, and they were living in Paradise Valley in Phoenix at the time, and she put her hands on her hip and said, "Grandpa, just where is your neighborhood?" And my dad remembered that. He thought that was so funny. He told the story over and over. So I didn't have a neighborhood, and I entertained myself hour after hour. When I was small, and Mother had to go back and forth between the house and the wash house. This was a few steps, but still had to go out in the cold or whatever, heat or whatever. And she wouldn't let me be outside because I'd had croup or I'd get sick. And so I'd play with the pans in the bottom of the cupboards and pull them out, and there was a lid that I'd spin round and round, and it had what I called Man in the Moon, because it had two little specks that looked like eyes and a nose, and I'd spin that around and around for my entertainment. I think I was a pretty easy child. Cheryl described me in her history as a placid baby, and I think that probably fit. I didn't make much fuss about things.
Was the kitchen, they built a nicer kitchen
Yes.
in the back. That was later, so...
Well, it was done at least twice, and I think maybe 3 times. I remember when that was done, the bigger kitchen was being built. And I don't even remember the small one, but I think Uncle Hiram Smith maybe is the one that did that. And I always had a bunch of nails, and I'd pound them in the boards all of the time they were doing that.
Was you helping?
What?
That was you helping?
Yeah, I helped. My dad said those boards are going to be half metal. So, but when Dad built that house, Hiram Smith, which was our neighbor up the road a ways, and Dad told him he wanted to build the house, and he had, Nada says it was $600. I remember $1,500, and Hiram said he could do it for that. And when he went home and went over his figures and things, he came back and he said, "Walt, I made a terrible mistake. I didn't figure all the boards. I only figured for half of them, and it just was an error, math error, you know. And my dad said, "Well, we can't build the house then," because those days you didn't borrow money; you paid cash. And
This is the money they got from the other house burning down?
this is what.
The money they got from the first house burning down?
Well, yes, and why I remember $1,500 is because I remember that Dad collected some insurance money on that, and they just said, "Oh no, they didn't have insurance then." But I have proof that the president of the church at that time sold insurance to people, and I don't know what the cost was, but when Hiram went home, he fussed about it, I'm sure, all night, and came back the next day and said, "Well, I figured out a way to do it." And he said, "We'll cut those 2x4s in two. So that house is built on 2x2s instead of 2x4s. And he got it done. At the time, there was a bathroom built in it, in the house, but there was no water piped in it. It had no plumbing or no sewer septic tank. And we still used the outhouse in the daytime, but at night we'd set a bucket of water by the toilet, and I could put it in the tank and flush it. So that was really an uptown thing for us, you know.
Especially in the wintertime, huh?
Yes, especially in the winter time. And then when Dad got the money together, they had, I think, Horace Carter was working for Weech and Taylor. I believe that's correct. And I remember that he was one that got the sewer dug, the septic tank dug, and the water piped into the bathroom, and then it was really nice. And that.
Do you remember your mom ironing with a sad iron, or did she have a propane iron by then?
No. I guess she did have a propane iron a little later, but I do remember her. I really don't remember using a flat iron, but I'm sure she had it. Those days you dried your clothes outside, and then anything, which was most of the stuff, had to be ironed. So we would dry it out of the line, and then we'd bring what needed to be ironed in, and we sprinkled it. They sprinkled it with water and rolled it real tight so that the water would go through it evenly. Later we got a ketchup bottle that had a cork lid in it and a little head on it so that we could sprinkle it that way. And my mother churned butter all the time, and she had one of the hand crank. I think Melissa still has it, actually, but John and I would argue about who got to start churning it. And we would churn until our arms about fell off, and then we'd let the other one, so the other one got to churn the butter, and Mother would come and look, and she said, "Oh, it's about there. I see some butter coming." And we finished it up, and then she had a little wooden mold, I guess, and it had I believe it had a bird design on the top, so her pound of butter had this little design, and she always put a little yellow food coloring in it, so it made it really yellow. And she sold it, or traded it actually, what I remember, because in the Depression, nobody could pay you for anything, or very few people could, so she had traded it at this good bar store and for, you know, in exchange for the things she needed, like flour and sugar and shortening. And she also sold cream to Mrs. Farley, who lived in that house where Star and Len Mattice lived later, and she, with some help from Dad, I'm sure, but sold chickens to the Star Cafe in Safford.
So you remember having chickens?
Oh yes, I probably remember better than any of the others because, better than my older sisters anyway, because during the Depression, the chickens, we got more and more and more. And I believe we had about 1,000 chickens.
That's what I remember reading. It was over 1,000.
Yeah, I was going to say
chickens.
1,500, but I just said 1,500 for the house. So I did, but and that's another thing I really looked forward to and enjoyed. We'd get a message, or we knew when the little chicks were supposed to be delivered at the depot from the
Pima?
train, and the depot in Pima, and I'd always get to go with Dad when he picked them up, and we'd get these big boxes of baby chickens, usually just two or three at a time, but there were a lot of little chicks, and there was always one or two or three that didn't make the trip, but the rest of them in the wintertime, before they had a brooder for the little chickens, and I've got to have a drink of water soon. We had the little chickens in the chicken house, a special building built for them. But before we had the brooder, we'd leave them inside at night, by the kitchen stove. And they were so cute. I loved playing with them. I just had so much fun with those little baby chicks. They're so cute and all fluffy, and they just ate and ate and ate. And when Dad got the brooder house, then they put them out there. It was leveled so that you put a box in one level, like, and another and another and another, and they'd leave a light on, and they had. I was just trying to think, because we probably didn't have electricity then, but they had some kind of light that shone all night, and left enough feed. Those little chicks would eat day and night, just chirp, 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 and eat. And that was fun too, to see how fast they grew. Then after they shed their fuzz, they got little white wings come on them. We had white leghorn chickens. We later also raised some Rhode Island Reds later. But anyway, when they got their feathers, they could go out through a little door from the brooder house to a fenced-in place that they'd be protected from the older chickens. And it was fun to watch them. And the day they got old enough that they laid an egg, then they got to go out with the big hens, and they had another section of the chicken run for them that was fenced between, so that the little ones and young pullets could run and play and eat and dig for worms and whatever. And then the laying hens had another section that had a big hen house in it. I remember we were in the kitchen, and Dad and Mother were getting stuff ready to eat, and Mother said, "Oh my, I forgot to shut up the chicken coop." And Karen, could you run up and do it? So I don't want any coyotes to get the chickens. Well, I didn't know, I was young enough, I didn't know what a coyote was. and I could just picture some great big thing, you know, it was dark. It was gonna get me instead of the chickens. And I ran so fast, and you had to put a lever down on the human door, and then you had to shut the little door down where the chickens came and went. But I got it done, and I didn't fuss about it. But I sure was scared. Not many things scared me, but that sure did. Okay, now, what do I remember about my mother?
I never knew her, so.
No, I guess you didn't, because I was still 8 when she passed away. I remember her being at the church with me the day I was baptized, and they put us in the janitor's little closet for her to help me get dressed, and they did that at the church house. All the kids that had birthdays in any one month, they did them all together. So different than today, you know. We hadn't been told much about it, and all the kids were around, you know, giggling and laughing and whatever when you came back up. And Clifford Dean Jr. is the one that baptized me. He was one of the priests in the priesthood, and he is related to me. So, but Dad didn't go, and no, I don't remember anybody's fathers being there. It wasn't a family thing, and it was just a mess, you know. But about my mother, she was never, at least after John was born, I would say she was never well, and she wasn't well very often before that, and the work was hard. You know, she raised those chickens, and I remember standing on a chair by her as she was in one sink, and I was standing on a chair by her, and I would help her clean the eggs, and she had a little thing that she could put the eggs on that would kind of look like you could see through it, so you knew if there was, yeah, if they were fertilized or not. And we had big boxes that held 12 dozen eggs at a time, and we'd clean them and put them in there one by one, you know, and it took quite a while, and it was kind of messy. And there's nothing more messy than cleaning a chicken coop outside. Nada said my mother did it alone sometimes, but I always remember Dad doing it, and took a whole morning or a whole afternoon to clean that out and put fresh straw in the little beds that the chickens had. They all had a bed that they'd get in. They were quite interesting. But Mother's work was hard and long. Nada was a great help to her, even though she was, you know, young, but Nada would do the housework a lot more than Mother would. And if anybody got a birthday cake or whatever, Nada would be the one that fixed it, and she kept the house clean. Mother would always rather be outside working in her flower bed, which was like most people's garden, you know. And then we had a garden too in back, so she had a lot to do. And I think she enjoyed the work as far as that goes. I know that she wanted to go back to California, where Aunt Martha was, and they got married in Los Angeles County, my dad and mother. And Grandpa Tom came out and talked him into that there was this land for sale that had been cleared, and got Dad all jazzed up to come and have his farm, and so they left. And the hot weather and the outdoors were kind of hard on her. I remember one time we went as a family, John and me and Dad and Mother on horseback. Dad rode a horse called Red Rocket, he was pretty wild. And Mother rode on Polly, which was an old mare, very sweet and old and nice. And I rode behind her, and John rode in front of Dad. And Mother was dressed up in a pantsuit. It's the only time I ever saw her, had ever seen her in anything but a dress. And it was gray and had embroidery on it. And we rode up to Clay Banks and back that evening. And I thought that was a real fun thing to do. She could do what had to be done, like preparing chickens and all that. I think she would get kind of lonely, and her life was kind of harsh. Because we didn't have cooling in the house and we didn't have adequate heating in it. We could never heat our bedrooms until we got, well, even after we got the floor furnace, we weren't supposed to. But she loved that floor furnace. Oh, she loved that. It was such a luxury to have it, just because we just had these two little space heaters to heat that whole house. And of course, it never heated the bedrooms. It'd go in there, it'd be like the North Pole. I remember one particular New Year's Eve, and it was so cold in that house. I just was freezing. And I went in and went to bed and covered up my head. And Cheryl always slept, before she left home, she always slept out in that little lean-to off the washroom, and it didn't even have windows that you could close or open. It just had a canvas covering over it.
Screen with canvas.
Mm-hmm. Screen with canvas, and you'd prop it up in the daytime and close it down at night. But it still got very cold, and she should never have had to sleep in that kind of condition because of her chronic sinus and croup. She's the only person I ever knew that was big and still got croup all winter. They did buy her a warm house coat so she could come in and out. I always feel bad about that when I think of it. But I guess Nada spent some time, she and Cheryl shared the bed out there. Nada complained about how cold Cheryl's feet always were. But Nada and I shared the bedroom that I was born in, a little front bedroom. And Mother and Dad had the big room that Weech and Taylor had added on and put a big long closet in it, but you only had one door, so you had to squeeze by. If you went back to the back of the closet, it was quite an ordeal. But Dad was good to give money to the house to be fixed up, and he liked to have some furniture. John slept in the crib by them, and they put the four legs of the crib in quart jars so the scorpions couldn't get up. And that's another thing I remember about our summer home, our home in the summertime, is that every summer morning, Nada and I would get up and go into the kitchen, and there'd be 3, 4, 5 scorpions in the sink. And she took a match and would burn their little stingers off. And I don't remember what she did with them after she did that. I don't ever remember carrying them out, but we must have. And they would come through the drain, and when John was a baby, really, I don't think he was even walking yet. If he was, just barely. My mother put him we had dinner. It was, our middle meal was called dinner, and our evening meal was supper. And she took John from the table, and he was all messy, and put him in the bathtub. And she went in there and turned the water on, and I think she left it running for a bit. And when she heard John screaming, she went in, and there was a scorpion that had stung him. He was stung 8 times, 4 on both legs, and they took him to the hospital. And we didn't even have any ice to put on him because we'd used all the ice for the meal. And
that's when the ice was delivered in a truck?
No, at that time, my dad wanted this refrigerator so bad. And I don't remember any time before we didn't have that. It was a Cervell propane run little refrigerator, but it made ice and in trays, and I think it would make 4 trays at a time.
Okay, so all of that ice was gone?
What?
That ice was gone?
Yeah, we'd used every bit of it, so there was no ice to soak him in or put on his wounds. He was kept in the hospital overnight, and my mother had gone up to the Morris Squibb Hospital and got him the next morning. I guess she came home at night, I don't know. Maybe she stayed there with him, but she'd just got home with him and put him down for a nap, and she reached her hand in the kind of pantry cupboard we had, and there was an empty shredded wheat box sitting in it. So she reached in and was going to throw that away, and she got stung by a scorpion. And she was highly allergic to them, and so they ended up taking her to the hospital. And then I've counted 8 encounters I've had with rattlesnakes right around my house, and one was over at when Uncle Aleph and Aunt Ethel lived where Nate and Ray lived. They had a garden, and we were over visiting them, and I was skipping through the garden, and I skipped right over a rattlesnake, went right between my legs. And then one time, sitting in the kitchen and eating, we had a hose, a green hose that was coiled up, you know, that Mother had used to sprinkle down the dust in the backyard because there were no glass. And it was coiled up there, and I looked out the window. It was right just a wall between us, and I looked at through that window, and I thought, that hose is moving. And then I realized it was a snake that was curling up in the hose. So, and that wasn't anywhere near my first one. My first encounter was in the saddle shed. We had these, they were like sawhorses, only they were high, and you put your saddle on them so they didn't get all crumpled up. And I loved to go out there and get up on the saddle. And I'd rock it back and forth. And I looked down one day, and there was this great big rattlesnake coiled up there. So I slid off that and went in the house and said, Dad, there's a big rattlesnake in the saddle shed. And he came out and killed it. He used a shovel, cut off its head, and he was 6'4", and he held that rattlesnake up as far as he could reach, and it hit the ground.
Oh.
And it had 21 rattles on it. That's one for every year. So
You were really lucky it didn't get you.
yes, I was lucky.
Somebody was watching over you.
So that's.
What are some of the things you remember about your dad?
Well, as I finished up my mother, she wasn't a real patient person. with kids. John was a terror. And I remember one time she said, I just ought to go out and get a switch and switch her little legs. And I thought, oh, I'll go get her a switch. And I did, and I came in and she got upset with me. What do you want? You know, she was not happy with me at all. And I thought, gee, I thought I was helping, but I didn't. Anyway, she loved going to California, and there was good times. We had some good times, and I remember one night when it was a real cold night, and we were sitting around this little space heater, and Dad said, "Oh, I've got something." And he got up and went in and got a jar or a container of malt balls, which I didn't really care much about malt balls, but they were chocolate covered with malt inside them, and we sat around the fire and passed those around, and he was really thoughtful of things like that, and he tried, you know, he would take us on picnics. He and Mother would load us in the back of the pickup and have everything they needed to cook dinner at Wet Canyon. You know, and that was always such a wonderful treat, because it would be so hot where we were. We could just drive, what, for
30 minutes?
30 minutes, I would say, and be up in that canyon was a special place on the mountain. Had a stream of water always coming through, and water had been piped up so we could, it just came out of a
Used to
pipe.
rain all the time there, didn't it?
All the time, and then went back into the drain and down into, so, but we'd go up there, and I remember Mother cooking chicken in a Dutch oven and some biscuits, and we'd take some blankets and sit around on those. And Dad also would take us every year, as long as I remembered, to Aravaipa Canyon. On Easter, we'd go out there, and I remember one time Rachel and Cheryl was with us, the Far May and Louise was with us when we went out there, and they'd made cakes and stuff, and the creek out there was running nice and full, and all the watercress growing along the edge of it, and oh, it was so fun to wade in that cool water, and that was just the most fun thing in the world to me, to go to Aravaipa. And I remember Cheryl and May Louise and several had made cakes and fixed some food while we had our picnic, and Far Taylor said, I like Louise's cakes best because she always lets them fall in the middle, and they're better. I thought that was really funny. But I remember many times that we'd gather gunny sacks. We'd wet the gunny sacks in the creek water, and then we'd slice the watercress off and put in those bags. We'd take home two or three bags of watercress, and my mother loved to eat bread with butter on it and watercress. She really loved that, and I still today get hungry sometimes for watercress, and I did see some in the store the other day out here.
It's spicy, isn't it? A little bit.
It has a little bite to it.
I think Mom had some growing at the house. As you went out the front door in the flower bed right there, I remember sitting there on the porch and chewing on it and having that. There was just a little bundle of it like this. But I remember.
We used to do that with a plant called oxalis that would grow in the yards.
I has some.
I don't know that it was
flowers.
watercress, I'm not sure,
It
but
was similar to watercress, and you
maybe that's
pulled
what
it and chewed on the stem, and it was sweet.
That might have been what it was.
We have
But-
that has pink flowers, the oxalis, but never eaten it.
I remember when you, Darwin, decided to wash the inside of your mother's window. You had seen her wash it outside with the hose, and you brought the hose
Surely
in.
I didn't.
Yes, you did. You came inside with the hose and was washing the windows.
I've never heard that.
I don't remember that. Which window was I washing?
Front one.
The
Front room.
Front family room? Oh, wow.
Front living room, whatever it was.
Probably Lorraine told him it was okay to do that.
On the carpet, I actually had the hose on.
Mm-hmm. And the furniture and the drapes and the whole thing. It was quite the story. But
Well, I blocked it out of my memory, I guess, because I don't remember. That kind of rings a little bit of a bell, but you were talking about what you remembered about your dad.
yeah, I do remember when I was quite small, we had the floor furnace, and I had 28 boils on my left leg. There was one great big one, very painful, then a whole bunch of little ones around. And it was my dad, and I just thought about this the other day. That was my dad who changed the dressings on it, not my mother. Nada said she never could handle squeamish stuff, and that she would faint easily. I don't remember any of that, but it was, I remember him doing it one morning when Grandpa Tom Batty had walked up from his house down the other side of the tracks. Lived in the house that your mother was born in, I guess, and it wasn't painted. But he was the tender-hearted one. Anytime my mother disciplined us, he'd say, "Oh, the poor little guy," or "Oh, don't." You know.
You're talking about Grandpa Tom?
No.
I know, my dad.
Your dad, okay.
Yeah. And he was the one that made Christmas fun, and he was the one that would think of fun things to do. Like we went down by the Glenbar store, and there was a dirt pond there. That's where I learned to swim. He taught me how to swim, and there was all kinds of pieces of glass and yucky stuff in it, moss, and I don't know what all. It's a wonder that we weren't all sick from it or something, but he's the one that taught me to swim, and he'd sometimes come and get Mom and John and I and take us to the Elledge place, Elledge place, and there'd be a clear stream of water that ran through that, and we'd get to play in the water and have fun doing that. So he kept things going and was conscious of making his kids' lives fun. Mother was a good cook, I thought, and she worked hard and always beyond her capacity, I think. But she was good to let me help her wash the eggs and things like that. So it was a good life for me in most ways. I loved, one memory I didn't mention was I loved the fact that our bedroom, with the field on the east side of it, had hay, had alfalfa planted in it. We slept with our windows open, of course. Ray would be out mowing the lawn, the alfalfa, and that smell was just so, there's nothing smells sweeter or better than fresh cut alfalfa. And it was just a dream to be able to wake up to that, you know. It was so neat.
You weren't allergic to it?
Mm-mm. Oh, okay. Now we can move on if you...
What do you remember about Grandpa and Grandma Curtis?
Well, not a lot. After Grandma died, Grandpa used to come and stay with us, and I got to know him pretty well out on the front porch. I remember he explained to me what I said, how can the earth go around and it go around this way, and it was spitting inside, and he took an orange and he showed me, like, this is the sun, and this is the earth, and so he had time to sit and talk, and he was a very good man. My dad used to get kind of irritated at him because when they lived on their old age pension, I think it was something like $90 a month, and they lived in Mesa in the nicest house they'd ever had up to that time, and lost my train of thought here. He'd pay tithing on the $90, and then if he'd made his whatever bills he paid, if he had $60 left the next week, he'd pay $6, and whatever he had left the third week, and he'd pay it on it. And my dad thought that was irritating because my dad always subsidized them. You know, he paid for their Sparkletts water, which was so necessary for a grandmother because Mesa's water is so terrible, and he paid for a lot of her prescriptions, I know. And I do remember them living in that house when she was sick, and Grandpa was trying to take care of her, and he had a hard time pleasing her. He cooked an egg and toast and fixed her some breakfast, and the egg was either undercooked or overcooked, or, you know, she fussed at him about it. I don't remember a lot about Grandma Curtis. She was really quite old by the time Nada and Cheryl both have really good memories of her when they were younger and lived in Matthewsville and by the wash. And they had they made a fence out of the Okatias branches, and actually they planted it in the dirt, and all those Okatias would bloomed after that, and I thought that was neat. I don't ever remember anything about the inside of that house at all. My dad always said that Grandpa Curtis was really a good worker. He worked better when he was working for somebody than he did when he was self-employed. And my dad adored both Grandpa and Grandma Curtis, especially Grandma Curtis. And she was sickly too. He worried about her because at night he thought she might be dead by morning, but in the morning she got up and had gone to the egg place and bought cracked eggs, I think, and brought them home and was fixing breakfast and doing things. And, he just worried about her a lot, and he was very, very good to her and things.
They lived to have a 50th wedding anniversary.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did, and they were very proud of that. They were temple workers in the Mesa Temple when he was paying all that tithing. They were good people and had worked hard and long. My grandmother gave birth to 7 children. The 3 girls survived to adulthood. One girl named Letty died when she was a child, about 7 or 8, I think. And the sons that they had all died as infants. I remember them being boys, the story saying that their boys all died, but Nada seems to think that there was a girl too, so I don't know, but
What do you remember about going to high school?
oh, I loved school. I always, from first grade on, I just loved being at school. And going to high school, by then, you know, you're old enough to do a lot of activities, and I was always involved in the clubs and the teams and all those things. And we had 7 girls in our class that were all close friends. I never just had one, there were 7 of us, and we had a great time together.
Who were some of those?
I've got a picture laying over on my table, I think, of 5 of us. There was me and Joy Rasmussen and Vilda Red and Marie Haney and Linda Larson. How many is that? Who am I forgetting?
Oh, Marie Haney is
What?
Emily's
Yes.
grandmother-in-law.
Yes, she is. And I thought that was real unusual in the fact that I knew Chris.
Nicole's father's.
Yeah.
Chris Neeson.
Yeah, Chris Neeson, and I knew his parents fairly well. They lived not very far from us, and in a 2-story house. But let's see, who did I forget? Jean Skinner and Rochelle Costner.
Ron and Jean, we see at the temple almost every week. They work in the.
She's still doing that, huh? I haven't talked to her for quite some time.
I'm going to put that in front of the camera so I can
Okay.
just see what it kind of looked like. So there's your picture you were talking about.
Yeah, and Linda Larson wasn't there and she wasn't often because, and Joy Rasmussen Brown was usually with Bob. So this is 2, 4, 5 of us, and there was Joy and Linda. And Linda was part of the Larson family that lived in Glenbar, and they had nothing. I mean, nothing.
She
And
was
so,
a twin to Lynn.
yes.
Lynn and Linda.
Uh-huh. And they were the 12th and 13th child in that family. And they lived in a little unpainted house, and I do mean little. It had 2 bedrooms and a bath, and a little front room, a place where there was a table, and then the kitchen, which was small and had a wood stove in it. And their father was always, he and Earl Roseberry would go off someplace to make money because they didn't have jobs in the valley. And by the time they paid their expenses and then came back, and they didn't bring much money home, I'm sure. All those boys, and there was a lot of them, had to sleep outside on the cement platform that was outside where the washer sat. And they slept out there, and I don't know if there was even floor room enough for any of them to sleep inside. Of course, some of them left. They always.
So what were some of the activities that you participated in high school?
At school, or anything that was going on. Played volleyball and softball. We didn't have a tennis at that time. I went to school in People High School when it was probably its poorest.
What year did you graduate?
1957. Yeah, May 14th, I think.
So you were in the new building. In the new high school.
Wait a minute, what?
Meaning the one that was built in 1940. Where they still, where the building you were in was the new high
For
school?
high school,
Yeah.
I suppose. I don't remember any other, but I know there had been one. Same one that's there today, only it's had new gym. And
Were you a good student?
yes, I was always top of the class. I was very competitive. When I was, I graduated as valedictorian of our 8th grade, and Rochelle Costner was salutatorian. Then I was valedictorian of our high school graduating class, and Gene Skinner was salutatorian. I hear my kids talk about how casual they were about their high school experience, and I thought, how could they think like that? I always had to be first. I always had to. I was not a good athlete, but I always played anyway, you know. And I couldn't sing, but I was in the choir. And I was in the band. I loved band. I played a saxophone, an alto sax until I was a junior in high school. And then the school bought a baritone sax. And at that time, Mr. Greer was our music teacher. And he let me, I'd showed a lot of interest in it. He let me be the one that got to play that. And it's really big, you know.
And you weren't.
What?
And you weren't big.
Right. When I graduated from high school, I was 5'4" and weighed 97 pounds. But that changed. But I was 120 pounds when I got married. When I married Gail, and I was 120 pounds when I buried him. So, but in between there was a lot of.
I hope I get back to my pre-weight.
Anyway, my dad again would always see that we had nice clothing. He loved to take Mother to Mesa to buy her clothes. And I just found out probably 6 or 7 years ago that Marie Haney had a problem because my clothes were always prettier than her mother always made her clothes, and Joy's mother always made hers, and they were the same, a skirt and a blouse, just different fabric. Joy nearly always had white blouses. I guess Rochelle's mother probably made hers. If she didn't, I don't know who would have. Linda had anything that anybody donated. She would wear the cardigan sweaters backwards because she didn't have, you know, that button, so it buttoned down the back. She always looked nice. She made whatever she had, and she always took really good care of her hair. And but I think about that family a lot and wondered. I know that Uncle Ether McBride, that owned the store, he supplemented. They got groceries there, let's say that. And I don't know who paid, if anybody ever paid him or if the church helped him eat. I don't know, but I know they had nothing. Except
what did you like about Christmas time? You said your dad made it fun.
Yeah, well, oddly enough, the most memorable Christmas time was when my mother was in the hospital in Mesa, and my dad would drive back and forth all the time, and he was so excited because the doctor had told him he could come and get her, take her home on Christmas Eve. And Nada cleaned the house till it shined, and we were all just waiting for him to come home. And when he came home, he sat out in the car and didn't come in, and Mother wasn't with him, and he was out there crying. And again, Nada stepped in, and that Christmas we had some fun, and we got Dad had provided gifts and things that I found out he stored them out in the wheat granary. You know, we had a granary that held all the different kinds of grains that we had, 2 or 3, and anyway, that was the one I remember most. But the one I remember being the most fun was the time I got the tricycle, and I always got a doll, but I didn't pay too much attention to dolls. I always liked to play with John's toys, what he got better. More than he did, because my dad always bought things that he wasn't quite old enough for. And so I stepped in and helped him out. And I remember my mother coming home from Safford once and was all upset because Sprouse Ritz already had their Christmas decorations out and we hadn't even had Thanksgiving yet. And I think, and I relate to this because I felt a lot the same way at times, that every day of my life I had to push myself to the last speck of energy, and Christmas added so much more to get ready for it. We always made sure, Gail and I always made sure our kids had a nice Christmas, and that was really important to both of us. I enjoy, after I can't remember just where we were living, but I joined a Christmas club at the bank, which they would automatically take a certain amount, $30 I think a month, out. And Gail fussed at me because they don't even pay interest on that. And I said, I know, but when Christmas comes, they'll send us a check, and they did. Until that time, we got a check for $69 and something that came from my grandparents' Curtis's estate. Martha got a third of it, and Lucy got a third of it. My mother was gone, so it was divided up between the 4 of us. And that's what Gail and I had for Christmas for quite a few years. I'd spend $10 on it, on some decent food, you know, like a roast or something that we never had. And then we'd spend the rest of it on the kids. And I remember Gail's mother writing and saying, "You told me what all the kids got, but what about you and Gail?" Well, we didn't get anything. And she should have realized that, I guess, but Christmas for me was after the kids were born, and Christmas is for little kids, and we enjoyed that. And the year we were in Florence, and I think that's probably where I joined the Christmas club, but we bought Cody a BB gun, which we probably needed to have our heads examined over. He wasn't that old, but he thought that he still, you know, that was his highlight of his life, that Christmas was. And we had a tree, and we had some good food, and I always feel like Gail and I, our place in the history of the Cluff family, and I guess maybe mine too, was to raise us, for us to be able to raise our family up out of our poverty and lack of education. And you know, my parents both only had 8th grade educations, even though they longed and yearned for more. and I could tell you a story about my dad and how he didn't get to go to school, but I think that would take quite a while.
When he was freighting with his dad in World War One, is that the...
No, it was Grandpa Tom had bought on credit a hay baling thing, a derrick, not a mechanical thing, but the horse or mule would walk around and around and around, and it would bale the hay into some kind of a bale. And so my dad was the one, and Grandpa did that all summer long. And Grandpa had promised Dad that he would, if he worked with him and didn't get paid, that at the end of that summer he would have the money to go to the academy, and the Gila Academy, which is where you had to go for 9th and 10th and grade, and 11th and well, they only had 10 grades in it when Gail's oldest sister attended it. So anyway, he wanted so bad to go, and he was a good student. And if you knew him, he had a beautiful handwriting and a gift for writing his thoughts. His journal was flowed like a novel. It's a sad novel, but he had a real gift, and I think my kids have had that too. And I like to think I did. But when the season had finished, they owed everything they'd made for what they ate, and put anybody they paid, and then the payments on the hay derrick took all they made.
So he didn't get to go.
No, he didn't get to go. That's when he became a freighter with, and my grandkids think when I say a freighter, they think of a freight train, I think, but a freighter, I'm sure you guys know, that was a buggy, or not a buggy, but a team of horses and a flatbed wagon that,
or two.
Yeah, or two. And
he said that his dad would drive the first wagon. There was a double wagon with, I think, 6 horses, and then he would follow behind with the single wagon, and I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 teams of horses, but they would haul lead ore from the
yes, they did.
To the railroad track.
That's another sad story. Their horses died of lead poisoning because they put their feet up on top of for the horses, up on top of the lead, and they all got lead poisoning and died, so it left them with nothing. That's one of the harder things. Dad couldn't talk about it without some tears. Yes. Somehow or other they got through it. But they had to carry their own cooking supplies along with them too when they went. All they ever had was what they camp cooked, and it was nearly always beans and biscuit and bacon. Side. It wasn't really bacon like we think of bacon. It was side meat, which was a lot of fat, but they'd slice it off as they needed it and used it.
So you talked about getting baptized. What was it like going to church when you were growing up?
Well, sadly, my family didn't go to church because back then, or seldom did, back then you didn't jump in your car and go 3 miles. You know, you had a certain amount of gas, and Dad had to do the chores and all, you know, night and morning, and he hadn't gone to church all the time. They were freighting and working the hay, and so he hadn't really, was a member of the church, but he hadn't really grown up in the church. And So I remember going, being taken by Dad to Sunday school when they held junior Sunday school in that little scout room that was on the property there by the church. Do you know what I mean?
Is it in the basement of the tithing office?
No.
Are you talking about?
It was originally the Eden church building, and when they did away with the Eden ward,
The Bryce Ward?
No, the Bryce ward is the Relief Society room
That was
that you
in the
have there on
50s,
that.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Is it the one on the highway right across from where I grew up?
Yes, exactly. And
Did you push
I
that?
was thinking that, well, I served as secretary when your mother was president of the junior Sunday school, but that was after that was part of the building regular. I was in the 8th grade and Gil was a freshman, and I asked him to the barn dance. It was the girls' choice barn dance, and he said yes, and I kind of decided at that time, that age, that he was the guy I was going to marry. And I never really dated anybody else. Certainly didn't have boys coming and waiting in line to get to date me. But he always thought I was wonderful, and we dated all through high school, except for just one period of time when he got a little domineering, I guess, with me or something, and I wasn't going to be conquered, or, you know, I wasn't going to be, that sounds bad, but I wasn't going to be second rate, or I don't know, I've always been very independent. So we kind of broke up for a while, but we got back together, and and he learned.
He
Once he
repented.
knew?
He repented.
What?
He repented.
Yes, he realized that he had kind of overstepped the bounds, I guess. Anyway, we always enjoyed each other's company, and some of our dates was he'd just come down to our house, and my dad subscribed to the Look magazine, and we would sit on the couch and look through that Look magazine and read the joke of Hazel, the maid Hazel, on the back, in the back of it. And, Nina always really liked Gail, and I seem to think Dad did too. And then Gail's family, mother and father, moved him off to Idaho as soon as the minute he got out of high school. And that, so I spent my senior year working on the annual, I think it was, and didn't go anyplace much except the ball games and basketball and football games. Gil was a good athlete. He got to play on the main string of football and basketball also by the time he was a junior and senior. He did, you know, I was proud of him, I
He had
guess.
graduated from Pima also.
Gail? Yes.
Okay. And so that after that's when he went to Idaho.
Yes.
She was a senior.
As soon as he graduated, they were loading up and going down the road. Looking kind of like the Grapes of Wrath, I think. And Julie's dad bought their property.
He must have come back at some point.
Well, he actually that summer I did get to go with Doris Haney was going to Idaho, and her brother was going to drive, and she had a son named Sidney, and she asked my dad if I could go with him, you know, and I'm sure that he paid him some of the gas money and whatever. But I got to go that summer and stay 2 weeks, about 2 weeks with him in their house. They had a nice house there. It was a farmhouse, an old farmhouse, but it was 2-story, and it had 2 bedrooms downstairs, and then there was the upstairs is where Gail slept, and his little domain up there, I guess. But that was a fun thing to do. He got to show me around some, and I remember they decided to take the day off after the cows were taken care of and be back by the time they needed to be taken care of. And we went to see a big dam up around Boise someplace, and we crossed a big, pretty good-sized stream of river water, and Gail had put a fishing pole in the car, and so Vernon stopped. They got the fishing pole out for me, and I baited it and threw it in the river, and a fish jumped up and bit it in the air. And Gail and his dad just couldn't believe it. Neither could I. But anyway, that was our fishing trip. That's the only person that did any fishing. Then he came back at Christmas time with an engagement ring. And we had planned for him to do that. And I remember when he came in and asked my dad, and I was standing on the floor furnace getting warm, and he were sitting close to it, and told my dad that we'd really wanted to get married, and he was okay with that. So then when I graduated from high school, 2 weeks after, well, a month, I guess, after I graduated on the 14th of May, and we were married on the 20th of June. And our honeymoon was a trip from Glenbar to Boise, Idaho.
So you had just turned 18.
Mm-hmm. Just 18. Not old enough, in my opinion, today for people to be married. And I didn't know how to do anything, but I got cookbooks for our reception. We had a very nice reception, and I had 2 different cookbooks, and I learned, you know, and Gail's mother taught me a lot of things. I learned how to can fruit. She and I spent the summer canning fruit, and there was a cannery. It wasn't church, it was a community cannery near where we lived, and we could go and can anything we wanted to for 10 cents a can. So we canned just about everything, including some carrots, which Gail's mother hadn't ever thought about canning carrots, but I said, we'll go in soup in the winter, you know. So she taught me a lot, and she was kind and gracious to me. And I learned to do bread. I became very much of an expert in making bread and rolls. Not while we lived in Idaho, but I started then. And I became pretty well known around Covina for my bread that sold for $5 a loaf, I think, at the bazaar. And
So you were married in the temple.
yes, in the Mesa Temple. And
Was there ever any question in your mind that that's where you wanted to be married?
No, there wasn't, because my young women's leaders called it mutual then, was Opal Cluff and Pearl Cluff. And they had great impact on, you know, this is the only way to do it. My dad kind of questioned it. He said, you don't think you need to try this out for a while and then go? And I said, no. I mean, I wouldn't have even considered it. So anyway, when we walked out of the temple...
He couldn't go.
What?
He couldn't go with you to the temple.
Yes, he did.
Did he?
Nina couldn't go.
Oh.
And everybody asked me, "Where's your mother, dearie?" All these elderly workers, which were 80 years old and I was 18, and I felt very out of place. And I'd say, "She's not here." "Oh, poor thing." I bet 5 people asked me that. And Nada was there, you know, with me. She was my attendant. Cheryl was there, but Nada, I think, well, she hadn't had Chris, so she had Link, but Nada was there, and she was dressed in a long white dress.
Chris was born.
Yeah, Chris was born.
February.
I guess he was.
February 1957, he was born.
Yeah,
You were
that's right.
married in June.
She had had the baby. That's true. Thank you. So it was hard on them because Cheryl had you and Nada had Chris.
She
And
was still expecting me. I wasn't born yet. I wasn't born until September of 57. So if you got married in June of 57.
yeah, and it was very hard for your mother to be there.
She was real sick with me.
Yeah, it was a hard time for her, the fact she was there. I'm pretty sure she was. Aunt Martha and Uncle Harold.
She would have been 6 months pregnant then.
Yeah. Gail's sisters were all there, 5 of them. And my dad bought lunch for everybody in the cafeteria in the temple.
We always liked eating there. Whenever we'd go, we would eat.
And I can't say it was the most wonderful experience for me. It was so strange and foreign, and I was so young, and everybody in there was so old, and they didn't have films then, so they did live productions. And I had a little hard time with Eve being 80-some years old. Adam and Eve being these old people. But it was the right thing to do, and we got it done, and I'm glad, and we had a good marriage. We were poor, really poor from the time we were married until Gail got the job in Covina, I guess. His first contract was at Florence High School, and it was for $5,200 a year. So we brought home $80 every 2 weeks. And we moved to Covina, and they signed him up at a work fair in Tempe. They hired him there, and that was in April. And then we went trying to remember the sequence. Anyway, we really didn't have, we couldn't even take the kids to A&W for ice cream or anything. I just didn't have anything. But we had bought that little house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a living room and a kitchen, and it had an indoor patio, screened-in patio that the kids played in a lot. But I really liked it. I liked it so much better than the house we lived in Mesa. It was newer, and the evaporative cooler worked really well. When we moved to Mesa, we had an old evaporative cooler, and it went kerclunk, 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 kerclunk. And we ran it day and night because we moved there in September. And the water heater was sitting outside. It wasn't even housed. It was on the west side of the house. And it was October before we realized that that water heater had never been lit. we had the first solar heating water in the country, I think. But We survived it all. I was called to be in-service leader in the primary there, and I really loved doing that. I loved teaching, and seemed to have a gift for it. We held it in different people's homes, the primary in-service meeting every month, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the church, and I had a friend that lived 2 doors down that was a member of the church that I really liked. We bought goat milk for Kevin when he was born. Cody was allergic to milk, but we put him on a soy formula, which was terrible. And we bought goat milk from a lady that down the street on Horn Avenue, and she sold it to us for 25 cents a quart, I think. We could buy, when we moved to Florence, the milkman would deliver it to our door, but it cost 68 cents a quart. So.
Yeah, ours have soy formula, several of them. I wish we would have known about goat's milk.
Curtis also was raised on goat milk, which sort of irritated people, Gail's dad, and because we lived on a dairy when Cody was born, and he couldn't drink the milk. When we signed on with Covina in April, and we went to Tennessee, Gail got a grant for. It was called a National Foundation grant. The purpose of it was by the government to help raise the quality for rural teachers in science and math. And he applied for 2 or 3 of them, and we got 2 of them, and we took the best one, which was in Tennessee. And we got a letter from Covina High School before we left there in August that they'd given him a raise. And I just thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world. He hadn't worked a day, and he got a raise.
I beat it.
Do you remember what his first contract there was for?
In Covina, $8,750.
Quite a bit more than $5,200.
It was quite a bit more, and I think that was with the raise. I know when he signed it, and we just thought, oh, we've got it made now, you know. And we did. We were able to buy a home after we'd been there 9 months, I guess. Or anyway, we bought a home in February. We moved from the rent house in February, and we rented it in September. So. And I wondered how we would ever make the payments on it, but we did, and our pay went up regularly, not like Plymouth High School. People that worked there didn't have any contract. They paid the coach, football coach, Gail Mortensen, more than they paid Mr. Dean, who had been there for a long, long time. So he was kind of in a mode of, they'd pretend to pay me, I'll pretend to work. And then he built houses. There are quite a few houses that he built, even little ones that he would sell. That Mr. Dean would sell.
Summers in Covina were probably a lot nicer than summers in Mesa, Arizona with an evaporative cooler, I bet.
Yeah, much. I told Gail I wasn't going to move in that house in Covina until it was air conditioned. So before we moved in, there was a big box with an air conditioner sitting in the living room.